I got involved in the diamond business. Let's say, I mean, I'm not in the diamond business per se, but I got involved in diamonds by accident about 12 years ago. I started a long time before that. I have more than 30 years experience, as Maggie says, in international development. It's actually more than 40. I sometimes lie on my CV about how old I am. I went to Sierra Leone as a CUSO volunteer in 1967. And by chance, I was posted to Koidu, which is the heart of the diamond area in Sierra Leone. And it was very much like the Klondike, or at least the way I imagine the Klondike must have been. Just a Wild West kind of place, all kinds of illicit artisanal diamond diggers everywhere. Company town with 500-member police force, 2 helicopters trying to deal with all of these illicit diggers. Just a crazy kind of place. I went on to other things. I didn't think a lot about Sierra Leone until the 90s when a war began there. Sometimes in the media it's called a civil war, but it wasn't a civil war in the sense that you had sort of one faction fighting against another. In Sierra Leone they call it a rebel war, because the Revolutionary United Front, which grew up and started to fight against the government with a view to taking over, talked about democracy and freedom and better government and all the rest of it, but the way they fought their war was to attack civilians. They went into towns, and if they could capture people, they would cut their hands off, cut their feet off. They did horrible things to women. It was a war on civilians, and it seemed mindless. It wasn't mindless in one sense. I mean, it was unbelievably awful, but it wasn't exactly mindless. They knew exactly what they were doing. By creating this terror around themselves, they could clear a town out just by saying that they were coming. You send word into the town, we're coming tomorrow, and the town would clear out, and it would allow them to forage and get supplies, food, water, and all the rest of it. But it also allowed them to take over the diamond areas very quickly. And they held on to the diamond areas because basically diamonds were what was paying for their weapons. Diamonds were fueling the war. Diamonds didn't cause the war, but diamonds were definitely what was paying for their weapons and guns. They were taking them across the border to Liberia, giving them to the president of Liberia, Charles Taylor, and he was importing the weapons for them. In the 90s, a group of us who had been volunteers in Sierra Leone, or Sierra Leonean Canadians, others who were concerned about the country, we formed a little group. We called it the Sierra Leone Working Group, and we began to talk about the war. We weren't talking about diamonds. We were just talking about the war and actually raising money for relief efforts. And one of the Sierra Leoneans in the group, after a year or so, said, you know, this thing is never going to be over. It's really about the diamonds, and it's never going to be over until somebody does something about the diamonds. For me, it was just like a light going on. I knew he was right the minute he said it. I don't know why I didn't think of it myself, but my time was my own, and I could do what I wanted, and I'd write. So I was able to find a couple of other people who were equally concerned. One, a Sierra Leonean journalist who was doing his master's at the University of Toronto, and another guy who had just had a triple heart bypass and retired, but didn't like being retired. So we looked into the war in Sierra Leone, and we wrote a report. It took about 6 or 9 months. We went to Antwerp so we could understand Antwerp in Belgium is the core of the rough diamond trade. We went of course, to Sierra Leone and other places to try and understand this, and it was true. Diamonds were fueling the war. Diamonds were completely unregulated. Nobody cared. The UN was not involved in Sierra Leone. It was not on the radar of very many relief agencies, and even when it was very small. It just didn't have the CNN factor and so on and so forth. Before I go on about what happened, let me tell you a little bit about diamonds. Diamonds are all formed in the same way. The right combination of rock and heat and pressure, and you get volcanic action that comes up from the Earth's core to the surface, and there will be diamonds in the center of this pipe. They're called pipes. It's not a volcanic mountain. It's really something quite small. You could have a kimberlite pipe It's not much bigger than at the surface, not much bigger than the size of this room. The biggest one that's known is in Saskatchewan, and I think it's about a kilometer across, but it's not economically viable for diamond mining, not many diamonds in it. If you get one of these pipes intact, so you'll get this volcanic action, and inside this pipe you'll get diamonds. And if you find one of these that's intact, what you do is you put a fence around it, you put your sorting factory up on the top, you dig this out like a root canal, sort the diamonds out from the gravel, and make money. The cost of setting up the Ekati mine in the Northwest Territories about 10 years ago was nearly $500 million. So it's not cheap. It cost quite a lot of money to set it up. But they paid it off in less than 18 months. So the industry can be quite profitable. What's happened in some places is that you get erosion, and the tops of these pipes get washed away down rivers and streams. Over 50 million rainy seasons, you get a lot of erosion, and the diamonds get scattered down rivers and across vast areas. These are called alluvial, meaning river, alluvial diamonds. You don't need $500 million to set up a plant. All you need is a shovel and a sieve, because these diamonds are often very close to the surface. They can be on the surface, a few inches below, maybe 10 feet. But all you need is a strong back and a shovel. And so you get the kind of situation that I saw in Sierra Leone, where these diamonds are scattered over hundreds of square miles, and the government simply can't police them. In Botswana, or Northwest Territories, or Russia, where you have a pipe intact, easy enough to police, but where you get these diamonds scattered, as they were in Sierra Leone and the Congo and Angola, anybody can get access to them. And the rebel armies figured out pretty quickly that this would be a great way to finance their wars. Other thing to know about diamonds is they're not all that rare. Although they cost a lot of money, a lot of this has been artificially created. I mean, the diamonds, gem diamonds, have no value apart from, they have no use apart from gems. Industrial diamonds, $5, $10 a carat. Gem quality diamonds can be $50, $100, even $1 million a carat with the right kind of diamond, but only for gems. 20 tons of gem diamonds are mined every year. 20 tons, that's a lot of diamonds. But De Beers, the big diamond cartel created by Cecil Rhodes in the 1890s and early part of the last century, he got the idea that if he could control all the world's diamonds, then if he controlled the supply, he could control the price. The Oppenheimer family took over from Cecil Rhodes eventually, and they controlled the De Beers company. They followed the same plan, and their idea was to control as much as possible. And until the 1990s, they probably controlled about 90% of the world's rough diamonds. So they controlled the supply, and they could hold it back when there was a recession. They also tried to manipulate demand. You all know the expression, "a diamond is forever." They've been using that slogan since 1948. De Beers has put more money into advertising diamonds than many companies put into advertising other things, and yet De Beers, until very recently, never sold a diamond to the public. Their business was all rough diamonds. It was not polished diamonds. And their business in polished diamonds today is still very, very small, very, very high-end market. So they were creating a generic demand for diamonds. The other thing to know about the diamond business when we came across it in the 1990s is that it was completely unregulated. Governments, of course, charge a small export duty on diamonds that are going out, and there might be sales tax on diamonds that are being sold. But diamonds are the smallest, they have the highest weight to value ratio in the world. I mean, I could have $5 million worth of diamonds in my shirt pocket and it wouldn't show. There's nothing else worth that kind of money I could put in my shirt pocket. They don't show up on airport scanners. Very, very hard to track them. Easy to conceal in very many ways. So governments basically just stopped trying, put a low tax on diamonds and hope for the best. So when rebel armies decided that they would get into the diamond business, what they found was an already flourishing trade in illicit diamonds. I would say probably in the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, 25% of all diamonds were in some way illicit. They were being used for money laundering, for tax evasion, for guns, you name it. In the mid-90s, probably at least 15% of the world's diamonds were what became known as blood diamonds or conflict diamonds. With these two colleagues, under the auspices of a small Canadian NGO called Partnership Africa Canada, PAC, we did this study of Sierra Leone, and we called it The Heart of the Matter, Sierra Leone, Diamonds and Human Security. If you've read Graham Greene's novel, The Heart of the Matter, written in the 40s, and about Sierra Leone, you'll know that the leitmotif through that was diamonds. And diamonds have been a problem for Sierra Leone for a long, long time. Very few people have benefited from diamonds in Sierra Leone. Investors, companies, government, thugs, crooks, you name it, they've all benefited, but the average Sierra Leonean hasn't. And by the end of the 90s, you had half the country displaced, tens of thousands of people killed, and nothing but sort of murder and mayhem around diamonds. We discovered in writing our report that Sierra Leone wasn't alone. This was a problem in the Congo, and a British NGO called Global Witness had already done a study similar to ours, but on Angola. So this was a much wider phenomenon than we had understood at the beginning. And we began to partner with Global Witness and work together on pushing this envelope, getting it into the public domain. In March of 2000, the Security Council came out with a report on Angola, diamonds and guns, and it confirmed everything that Global Witness had said about Angola and everything we had said about Antwerp, De Beers, and the industry. So now it suddenly moved from being something that NGOs were pushing to something the Security Council had to pay attention to. And this forced the industry to move quickly from its position, which until then had been guns kill people, not diamonds. Diamonds don't kill people, guns do. They suddenly began to realize that they had to engage on this. There were people in the industry who knew and who said quite openly that diamonds were part of the problem, a major part of the problem, and that if the industry didn't do something, it would start to run into some pretty big trouble. Diamonds are a luxury good. People don't need them. They just don't need them. And to have diamonds associated with blood and war and killing and all the rest of it, I think they understood they really had to get behind some kind of a change. And so a meeting was called by the government of South Africa. It was held in Kimberly, the town where diamonds were discovered in South Africa in the 1860s. And it brought together the NGOs that were concerned about this, and governments, and the industry to talk about what might be done. And pretty soon it became clear, I mean, the idea, almost a blueprint, certainly an outline of what was to come, was designed at that very first meeting. The idea was to develop a global control system for rough diamonds, a certification system that would sort out the conflict diamonds from the rest. In order for this to work, all the major diamond producing countries had to be in it, and all of those that trade in diamonds and those that polish diamonds and those that buy diamonds had to be in it. So the Kimberly Process, it took 2.5 years to get what's called the Kimberly Process certification scheme. And later we can talk about what all went into that. I mean, the NGOs had to campaign loud and long to keep governments on track, to push the industry, to keep everything moving forward. But in January 2003, the KPCS came on stream. It was voluntary in the sense that no government had to join. It was voluntary. If you don't want to join, if the United States doesn't want to join, they don't have to. But if you join, then you must do certain things. Basically, you have to guarantee that any diamond, any rough diamond leaving your country, is conflict-free. And that means you've got to have internal controls. You've got to know where the diamond came from. So if you're a diamond mining country like Canada or Congo, you have to be able to track that diamond as it leaves the country. Before it leaves the country, you have to be able to track it back to the mine and know that there's a chain of custody and that this diamond is clean. It hasn't been dropped into the system by thieves or rebels or whatever. If you're a trading country like, say, Israel or Belgium, and you're re-exporting rough diamonds, you have to be able to track them back to the point of import. So basically, everybody who is exporting diamonds has to know where they came from. And nobody will import diamonds. Nobody who's a member of the Kimberly Process will import rough diamonds from a country that is not a member of the Kimberly Process. So Uganda is not a member of the Kimberly Process. There are diamonds being smuggled into Uganda. There was a Ugandan grad student at the University of Edmonton, University of Alberta, tried to bring some diamonds in a couple of years ago. He didn't have a Kimberly certificate, so he was arrested. He didn't have a Kimberly certificate from Uganda. They're not a member, and they can't issue a certificate. So he had diamonds that had no provenance. And so his diamonds were seized, he was arrested and fined. It was just a small sample. If it had been major, he not only would have lost his diamonds, but he probably would have gone to jail. So they're quite stiff penalties. Kimberly Process is quite good. I mean, it's really ingenious, voluntary, but you have to be in if you've got any kind of diamond industry. Otherwise, you're going to be working in the outside gray or illegal trade. A few things went wrong with the Kimberly Process, however. One was, I guess the first thing that went wrong was Venezuela. Venezuela has diamonds. Venezuela just fell right off the radar. Venezuela stopped issuing certificates. They stopped sending in their statistics. This is another thing you have to do. You have to submit quarterly production statistics and semi-annual trade statistics. So it looked like Venezuela had stopped mining diamonds. The Kimberly Process couldn't make contact with the Venezuelan government over this. We at Partnership Africa Canada sent a team to Venezuela and found out what was going on. Essentially, the government had lost interest and lost control. Diamonds are not big for Venezuela. Oil is the thing. I think it was just incompetence. They simply weren't paying attention anymore. And they didn't intend to. When we issued a report showing that diamonds were being mined and smuggled out, 100% of Venezuela's production being smuggled out of the country, they denied it. They accused us of all kinds of things. And the Kimberly Process decided to look the other way. They decided to accept Venezuela's position, which was that although there were some problems, basically they would stay in the Kimberly Process and they simply wouldn't issue any more. They simply wouldn't mine or export any diamonds for 2 years while they got their house in order. Well, in fact, all that did was endorse the status quo, because they continued to mine, they continued to export. And so the Kimberly Process, which was designed to stop diamond smuggling, actually endorsed diamond smuggling from Venezuela. I mean, it's bizarre, but that's what happened. And that's what's still happening right today, right at this moment. And then about 18 months ago, something happened in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had diamonds, but not a huge diamond industry. And there was a big diamond rush. Somebody found diamonds in a new area, and there was a huge rush. Tens of thousands of people rushed into this area, just like I had seen in Sierra Leone in the 60s, just like the Klondike. The government of Zimbabwe, not noted for its sophistication, sent in the Air Force and started shooting people. They killed over 200 of these artisanal diamond diggers. There were beatings and theft and rape and a pretty unpleasant human rights situation. Now, the Kimberly Process has all kinds of rules and regulations, but human rights are not part of the minimum standards that a country has to abide by. The NGOs had been pushing for human rights inclusion, and when this happened, we pushed much, much harder. We said that countries that don't have a good human rights record in the Kimberly Process should be taken to task. And in the case of Zimbabwe, where there was major smuggling, no rule of law, where ZANU-PF had its paws all over diamonds and diamond smuggling, we said that Zimbabwe should be expelled. It should be suspended from the Kimberly process. That didn't happen. An awful lot of angst inside the Kimberly process, but no serious action. Zimbabwe continues to export diamonds today. I should say that the Kimberly process is a tripartite thing. It's 50 governments plus all the governments in the European Union, with industry and NGOs, civil society, as observers. But observer means actually full participant. So if you put your hand up in a Kimberly meeting, it doesn't matter whether you're an NGO or an industry person, you'll be recognized and you can say what you want. And the NGOs kept pushing and lobbying. But in fact, these things were happening. The Kimberly process was simply covering up a lot of bad things that were going on. And in the case of Zimbabwe, you clearly have blood diamonds. It hadn't occurred to us that a member government would actually kill people in order to enforce the Kimberly process, which is all about stopping the killing of people. I mean, the logic just doesn't scan. So about a year and a half ago, I left the Kimberly process with a bang. I made quite a lot of noise about it, and I've been talking about it ever since, and writing about it, and trying to speak about it from the outside to put the kind of pressure on that I think they need. Governments and industry pay attention to the media much more than they do to people sitting inside a room debating some of these issues. Now there's we can talk about the Kimberly process more and diamonds, but there is perhaps a bigger issue around diamonds, and that's the development issue. The Kimberly process is all about regulation. It's not about development. There are still 1.3 million artisanal diamond diggers in Africa, and for every digger you've got a family of dependents. So there are 5 or 10 million people dependent on that kind of diamond mining. No big companies are mining diamonds. It's not like De Beers or BHP or Rio Tinto are involved in that. These are people who are often in it because they're poor. They usually don't earn more than $1 a day. They work and live under pretty terrible conditions. They're up to their waist in mud all day long. The health conditions are poor. The income obviously is rotten. They're vulnerable to just about every kind of predator out there. The military predators have gone, but there are other kinds, and they take advantage of these people relentlessly. We were asked when we were campaigning to get the Kimberly process set up, we were asked by NGOs who came to what became a fairly large coalition, what about environmental issues? What about labor issues? Are there child minors? What are you doing about these things? And we said we're not doing anything about those things. Those are all problems, but we're not doing anything about it, because if we can't get these wars stopped, then we'll go after the diamond industry itself. We'll try to kill the diamond industry, or at least make it so unpleasant for people to buy diamonds that they'll have to think twice about this symbol of love that is used for engagement rings and all the rest of it. We didn't do that at first. We didn't want to do that because a lot of very poor countries depend on diamonds. Botswana, Namibia, there are 15 countries in Africa that produce diamonds, and many of them have nothing to do with conflict diamonds. Diamonds are India's biggest export. There are 1 million cutters and polishers in India. India doesn't have many diamonds of its own, but it imports rough and exports polished. China is a big producer of polished. Thailand, Sri Lanka. So our objective was not to hurt the industry. It was really to end the wars. Once we got the Kimberly process up and running, we began to look into the development issue, though, because it's all very well to police diamonds, but if you've got more than 1 million people who are in it because they're poor, and they produce about 15% of the world's gem diamonds, then you really haven't solved the problem. They will always be vulnerable to these predators. They are not benefiting their communities. The governments of those countries are not benefiting from what they produce. There will always be social tension and violence around diamonds. So we began to talk about this development issue, and the Kimberly process said, we're not really interested. We are about regulation. We aren't a development organization. And it's understandable. I mean, it includes governments like Ukraine and Armenia and Belarus, and a number of others that really, I mean, they're in it because they want their industry to be clean. They're not in it because they care about development in Sierra Leone or Liberia. So we created something else. We had a couple of international conferences to see whether this was a good idea or not. We created an organization called the Diamond Development Initiative, and the idea here was to bring, as in the Kimberly Process, to bring industry and civil society and interested governments together to work on this development issue, to try and do something to change artisanal diamond mining from this chaotic, dangerous thing that it is into something that actually might benefit the people who dig, the communities where they work, and the countries and the regions, and to try and make sure that conflict diamonds couldn't come back again. So this Diamond Development Initiative, I chair the board of it. We created it as an American. We incorporated it in the U.S. and got American charitable status. And we did that because we thought that the best funding opportunities were in the U.S. and we needed to get charitable status there in order to attract foundation money. But we're now incorporated in Canada. The head office is in Ottawa. We have an international board of directors that includes people from civil society and governments and industry. We have a big advisory group that represents those same constituencies. And we're working on a whole variety of things, including something like fair trade diamonds, not exactly fair trade, but something, we're calling it development diamond standards, creating ethical diamonds that are produced by artisanal diggers, trying to connect them with buyers. There's a lot of retailers understand that this is an issue. They want ethical diamonds. But we can connect retailers, and some of them are small retailers and some of them are big ones. Tiffany wants clean diamonds. If we can link the retailer with these artisanal producers, then we really can start to do something about this problem of development diamonds. Of course, setting up standards is one thing. Having independent third-party verification is another. So it's not nearly as easy as it sounds, but it's possible. I brought some flyers of DDI. There's a lot of, I've got a few more if these aren't enough. Pass those back, but I've got more. And if you're interested in the subject of conflict diamonds, the Partnership Africa-Canada website has a lot of reports. It's really the place of record on all of this stuff. And from a development point of view, the DDI website is the place to go. I've jumped around quite a bit, but I want to leave enough time for questions. One of the things that I've done since I left the Kimberly Process is to write a book on the subject, Blood on the Stone, Greed, Corruption, and War in the Global Diamond Trade. It's very good. I understand Maggie told me that you've ordered some for people who are interested, but they didn't come, right?
There's a bit of a...
They will be coming.
They will be coming.
They will be coming. I don't know how many you've got coming, but
20.
20. I brought a few. If you're interested, I can give you a slight reduction on the retail price. But I wanted to mention it because one of the things that happened to me was after I got started on this, I was invited by I got a call from the UN Security Council and their office, and they said, would you let your name stand? We're going to have an expert panel on Sierra Leone. We want to look into the connection between diamonds and guns in the war. This was in 2000. They said, would you let your name stand as the diamond expert? Well, I thought they were joking. I mean, I was not a diamond expert. I by then understood a lot about how the diamond trade worked, but I wouldn't know a diamond from a piece of Pokemon. But they didn't care about that. It really isn't about saying whether this is a diamond or whether this diamond is worth more than that. It was really about the systems and the criminality. That's what they wanted. I didn't expect to get appointed. I thought they just needed 5 names on the list, and they probably already had the name. But a couple of weeks later, I got another call saying the Secretary General has appointed you. So suddenly I was on a team with people from Interpol, people who are experts in weapons and air traffic control in Africa, trying to track down the flow of guns and diamonds. How many of you have seen the movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage? Mm-hmm. Well, if you remember that movie, a lot of it has to do with diamonds and guns in Liberia. And Nicolas Cage is the Russian. He's loosely modeled on Victor Bout, who's a real life, very, very nasty, dangerous man. But in that movie, they have the diamond guy, Nicolas Cage, hounded by the UN team. And the UN team has planes and guns and uniforms and all the rest. I can tell you, UN teams do not have planes and guns and all the rest. We were very low-keyed and certainly didn't have guns or security or anything else. But we did go to Liberia, and we did meet Charles Taylor, and asked him pointedly about what he was doing, fueling the rebels and supporting them with weapons and training and staging grounds and all the rest of it. He denied everything, obviously. But time passes and things change, and Charles Taylor finally wound up in a war crimes court in The Hague. And in the business, when you work in international development, you get rewards in a whole variety of ways, but I never expected that I would be invited to be the first witness at his trial. That was for me, that's almost the high point of my international development career. And when I was doing this book, when you write a book, you want to get famous people to write blurbs on the back cover saying marvelous book, a masterly account, compelling narrative, important story. But I told the publisher I wanted this on the back cover as well. Smiley is lying through his teeth, said former warlord and Liberian President Charles Taylor at his war crimes trial. I thought, good for him, he can help advertise the book. I really leapt around on all of this. We're going to have the movie tonight, Blood Diamond, which some of you have seen. If we have time this afternoon, I'll talk about it now. If not, I'll talk about it before the film. If you've seen it, might be interesting to see it again, see it through new eyes, because I can talk to you a little bit about what's in the film and why it's there and what's not in the film. But let's leave the film aside for now, and I'll just stop talking about this, and if you've got questions or comments, I can perhaps try to answer them.
Are the artisanal, let's say, people who go out to find them in alluvial plains, is it constant production? Is it reliable?
No, and that's one reason they don't earn very much money. Usually what happens, somebody will organize 10 or 20 or 50 guys into a gang, and there's an idea that there might be diamonds over there, or there were diamonds over there 10 years ago and maybe we didn't dig deep enough. So they'll go at it again, and the guy who organizes them, if it's organized, it might not be, but if it's organized, he'll give them a lunch, and maybe he will pay them some money, or maybe they have different systems. They have what they call a 3-pile system in Sierra Leone. So there's a pile for you, the digger, there's a pile for the community, and there's a pile for the guy who organized. And of course there's always an effort. If you've seen the movie Blood Diamond, you'll see the guy finds a big one and he tries to hide it. Everybody is watching everybody else like sharks to make sure that doesn't happen, because if you're actually going to share the wealth, you want to make sure that one guy doesn't get away with the good stuff. But they don't earn a lot of money, and sometimes they'll dig for days and get nothing, or they just wind up with tiny little industrial stones that also are not worth much.
I know recently that a bill was defeated in the Canadian Parliament regarding the accountability of Canadian mining companies abroad in terms of keeping them accountable to Canadian standards. And I believe one of the arguments against it was that we should respect the sovereignty of these other nations. We shouldn't get involved in the way that this bill would suggest that we would otherwise be doing. So I was wondering if you face similar resistance with your diamond development initiatives in terms of keeping companies and artisanal miners accounting to international standards?
Not really. When we came up with the idea of doing something developmental, I made the presentation to the Kimberly Process in November 2004. We had done another study and we showed how terrible it was for these diggers and how this was the root of the conflict diamond issue. And unless you did something development to deal with the development problem, we really hadn't solved it. I made the presentation and there were a few polite comments, but a lot of people, it was clear, were not interested. But at the end of the presentation, which was about noon, the De Beers representatives, there were two of them, came up and said, can we have lunch? They said lunch now, not like, can we sort of have a hypothetical lunch sometime later? Can we have lunch right now, go for lunch together? And they said, look, we understand, we get it, you're right, and we'd like to do something about it. So we really had to think very hard about whether or not to co-sponsor with Global Witness and De Beers a meeting in London to bring all these interested players together. But the truth is the diamond industry got it. They were caught completely off base by conflict diamonds. They could see this one coming a mile away. How does it look? 1.3 million artisanal diamond diggers earning nothing and standing up to their waists in mud producing your diamond engagement ring. This just doesn't work. So better to get behind this and support it, which they do, than to deny it or stay off on the sidelines. As I said earlier, they're not involved in this kind of mining. There are other big companies now. De Beers is not as big as it once was. None of the big companies are interested. They wouldn't touch this kind of mining with a barge pole because it's too problematic in every way. They're not going to make any money at it. It's reputationally problematic, you name it. But they understand that it exists, and if NGOs are onto this one next, they better help to try and fix it. And the governments of the countries are also very keen on this. You'd be surprised. Governments of Angola, not a pretty government. DRC, not a pretty government. Sierra Leone, Liberia, and a few others are very supportive of this. I mean, they actually understand it. It will benefit them. I mean, if they can formalize this part of the economy, there'll be less chaos, there will be more taxes. It just makes sense all around. So we're not getting a great deal of resistance on this. The problem is how to fix it, in a sustainable way. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the Kimberley Accord, if a lot of mining interests were involved from the get-go, because it seems to sort of maintain their businesses quite nicely. Because if a diamond has to be registered from a registered mine, then somebody with the connections or the money to start up would have had to start that mine. So it effectively cuts off the competition of any other would-be startups that can't get a loan to start, or a $500 million loan to start a mine or what have you. So I'm wondering, and of course that reinforces and it cuts off a lot of artisanal diamond miners who don't have the means to obtain permits for licensing their diamonds for the Kimberley Accord.
Well, it's problematic for the artisanal sector, and as I said, they produce about 15% of the world's gem diamonds. And De Beers and some of the others can say our diamonds are clean, and they actually are working. There's a thing called the Responsible Jewelry Council that brings together all the big companies from the mining end right through to retail, and they're setting up pretty rigorous standards, and they are insisting on third-party verification, independent third-party verification. So this is unusual in an extractive. I mean, the diamond industry, which used to be somewhere deep in Jurassic Park on corporate social responsibility, has moved to a leadership position on this. There are problems. I mean, they don't have a chain of custody for their diamonds yet. They're still working on this. But they are not interested in and can't engage the artisanal sector. So that's why they're glad to see us come along and try to do something about this. But the Kimberly Process doesn't keep anybody out. It doesn't protect those that are in. I mean, BHP was not in diamonds until about 15 years ago. If there was another mining company found a mine and wanted to get in, it wouldn't. Kimberly doesn't the current membership doesn't keep anybody out, doesn't keep new players out.
You were saying once the Kimberly process was implemented, there was a kind of on one side you had the countries, the extractor countries and polishers that had agreed to be part of the Kimberly process, and on the other side you had the ones that didn't, or the ones that dropped off the radar, like Venezuela. What was, I mean, they must have still produced their diamonds anyway, so how did it go about? Was there a whole other network of extractors, polishers, and sellers outside of the Kimberly process, or where the two trails kind of blur together?
Well, two things could happen. What's happening to most of the Venezuelan diamonds is they're going to Brazil or Guyana, and they're basically just being dropped into the stream there, and they're getting passed off as Brazilian or Guyanese diamonds. Their internal controls are not good enough to spot these, and so they get laundered into the Kimberly stream that way. But the other thing they could do is they could just get on a plane out of Caracas to Antwerp or Hong Kong or somewhere else and go straight to a cutting and polishing factory. Cutting and polishing side of it is not included in Kimberly, which doesn't make any sense. NGOs have argued that this has to be part of it. It's a major loophole. And of course, if you've got diamonds being smuggled out of Venezuela and out of Zimbabwe and out of countries that are small producers but are not in the Kimberly process, like Gabon or Cameroon, these diamonds have to go somewhere. Where are they going? And this was one of my frustrations. We couldn't get the governments. It isn't the industry that's caused the problem for Kimberly. It's governments that refuse to acknowledge the problem or deal with it. I didn't say that one of the biggest problems in the Kimberly process is that all decision making is by consensus. Anybody here care to guess what consensus means? What does the word consensus mean?
Everybody has
The
to
definition
agree.
of consensus.
Everybody has to agree.
Everybody? You think that's what it says in the dictionary?
Majority or plurality.
Yeah, I mean, if you look in the dictionary, consensus means most, everybody. There's a generalized agreement on things. But in the Kimberly process, no, it's unanimity. And so, if one government objects, then you can't go ahead. So when the idea of suspending Venezuela came up, guess who objected? Venezuela objected. And of course Venezuela has friends anyway, so they weren't alone. Same thing with Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is being protected by South Africa and others in the region, and they will not hear of a suspension of Zimbabwe. Same thing with human rights. China, Russia, South Africa, oddly, do not want to have any discussion about human rights. So you've got this agreement, which has got lots of teeth, but it's not allowed to bite. Politics. Sometimes very small regional or national politics have got in the way of a regulatory system that is really trying to, it's all about conflict prevention. And you know, this, if you look up Kimberly process on the internet, I think for every article that tries to explain what it is, you'll see 3 now that are quite critical of it. It's got huge potential. It has to be made to work because the idea of going back to where diamonds were in the 1990s is inconceivable. The industry gets that. A lot of governments do. The Canadian government does. Canada has been a leader in trying to make this thing work and has been very good in a whole variety of ways. I mean, I'm very critical of CEDA on all kinds of fronts and of this government. But the Department of Foreign Affairs has led on this, along with Natural Resources Canada and Indian and Northern Affairs, because they have responsibility for the diamonds in the Northwest Territories. Canada really has been a leader in trying to make this thing work. But until they fix this consensus problem, and until they're willing to get independent third-party verification into the Kimberly system, it's really going to be a certificate that isn't worth very much.
I was hoping you could expand on your ideas of formalizing artisanal diamond mining. Is this something